Hey, folks, y'all know the drill. Let me move this a little bit closer. Hey, very good. Okay, so I see already. Y'all can hear me and see me. Excellent. Very good. Let me try to get rid of this thing on the screen. I don't know what this is. Okay, who knows? Very good. Excellent. Good to see you too, Douglas, Gannicus, Max, the usual gang, Bake Nurse. See you all on here. It's good to see your faces or your names, at least, again. So you know what? I saw something today. I was looking back through comments that people had left. Occasionally, I'll go through Patreon, like the comments that people leave under videos and see if anyone has left like really good, interesting questions or things that I think, a lot of people would or more people would get something out of hearing an answer to, or just a topic that people might be wanting to talk about or whatever. But I saw something by Terry Gallagher. Said he made a really good point. He was talking about how sometimes, well, I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but he was saying one of the things that makes these live streams interesting, like I may not necessarily feel like they're that interesting sometimes, and I think a lot of it is, in some ways I always feel like this kind of pressure that no one puts on me but myself to make this the best that I possibly can for y'all, and to make sure you get something out of it every time we do this that you may not have already gotten before, even though we're talking about things that we've already talked about. Even if we're going back and talking about something again, like the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, which some people are probably sick to death of hearing of by now. Even though we're talking about something that we may, that some people may feel we've talked into the dirt, I always want to approach it in a way, or try to rack my brain or remember something that I may not have even thought about in years, that gives you, like a slightly different perspective on it, or adds a tiny bit of information that you didn't get last time, or whatever it is. Not just rehashing, like going through a rerun, but the comment that Terry Gallagher had left was about how one of the things that makes this so interesting is how every single time we do a live stream, there's a different mix of people on here. All the people that are leaving comments, all the people that are asking questions, it's like it's not the same people over and over, and different people bring a different energy to it every single time. So it's almost like you are experiencing something that, even though I might be talking about some of the same things, it's like it's going to have a little different feel to it because of the energy that everybody else is bringing to it. And I thought that's actually a really good way of looking at it. And it's the same way for me. It makes it feel different for me every time, just because there's a different mix of people. So thank you for pointing that out, Terry. That was really good for me to hear. So I'm trying to think if there's any other, what do they call it when you start the meeting, business that we need to discuss beforehand. I can't think of anything off the top of my head other than that Derek, in a few days or sometime, he said he was going to do it whenever he got back to New York. He got back yesterday, I think. So sometime over the next few days, he's probably going to add the 15 more seats. We can have 15 more people at the retreat in October. So he's going to open it up to 15 more people. And I'll let y'all know. I'll post that. He already also has a waiting list of people who have contacted us, asking if we would let them know if someone dropped off or if new places opened up or whatever, to let them know so that they could get a seat. So he's got that. And we'll let y'all know, hopefully within the next few days. Even if you can't come in person, for whatever reason, you can still join us through live stream. There will be a live stream link, and I've realized more and more whenever we first started to set this up, whenever we first started to talk about doing this, um, I was pretty certain that this was going to be my last retreat. Honestly, I thought the very last one we did in Joshua Tree, when I walked away from that, I felt like I was kind of finished. Y'all know I've talked about this before, how like I go into things and I completely exhaust those things. And by exhaust them, I mean, I feel like I express or say or whatever it is, everything that I have or that I feel compelled to do through this particular medium. And then it's almost like it's time to move on and do something else. Like for example, I felt that way when I was doing art shows. I was doing all the talismans and drawings and paintings and sketches and doing art shows, all over the US. And then that eventually spread to doing them in other countries. I think about it now and sometimes I forget some of the things that at the time I thought were absolutely amazing. I was invited to be like part of this art show put on by the Romanian government in some castle in Romania. And they had contacted me and asked if I would uh, be willing to submit two pieces to this art show. This it was a pretty huge deal over there. And I forget about those things sometimes now until I look back on. I forget about stuff all the time. Things that I think probably in a normal life, one of these things would be something, to be proud of and to remember. But I've been, I don't say this to be bragging. That's not why I'm saying it. I say it to kind of express and acknowledge how blessed I've been in a lot of ways in my life. People think I've had a horrible life in some ways, and I don't think that at all. Yeah, I may have been through some horrible things at times, but I've also gotten to experience amazing, amazing things. So I'd completely forgotten one day. Somebody reminded me, a friend in New York I was talking to at one point said something about that time we went to the UN. And it was one of those things, like it struck me like a bomb going off in my head. I thought, I spoke in front of the UN. I spoke in front of the United Nations and completely forgot about it. Would have never even remembered it again if he hadn't brought it up. And it just struck me like how many of these things I've gotten to do in my life that most people would look at one of these things and think, that's a lifetime accomplishment. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, just how fortunate I've been in so many ways to be able to do things. Even when I wrote Magick, when I wrote that first book on magic, it felt like I poured part of my soul into that. Like it took something out of me when I did that. I knew at that moment that I had done a huge part of what I came into this world to do. It was something I'd wanted to do ever since I was a child. And it finally happened. It was finally born into the world, into the material realm. That was a very huge deal for me at the time. But the thing with the art shows is, I eventually reached a point where I thought, I don't have anything else to say. Through this venue, through this medium, I have expressed everything I wanted to express. I've done everything I wanted to do. I've accomplished everything that I wanted to accomplish. And what are y'all talking about? Oh yeah, Bake Nurse says Romania. How neat! So Dracula. That's what crossed my mind at the time. Yeah, but even with the art shows, it was like I had an amazing time while I was doing art. I got to work with some amazing people, do some amazing collaborations, go to some incredible places. I got to be in the art world, which is really, really hard to make it in, to be honest. And I got to experience that. And the same way with the books. When I wrote Life After Death, it ended up on the New York Times bestseller list. I can't remember what number it got to, but that's something. Even though that book has by far outsold everything else I've ever written. None of my books on Magick or, the photography book or any of that stuff has even come close to putting a dent in the far-reaching impact of life after death. Nothing else has come close to getting on the New York Times bestsellers list. So I realized, even though that book did not mean as much to me as the books on Magick, it was still a tremendous experience and blessing in my life. Mm. And then when I started to write the books on Magick, that was something that was a lifelong dream for me. I thought I used to think that you would have made it in the world, that was the epitome of making it, if you published a single book on Magick. And I got to do it 3 times. But I also, after that third one, no, I'll take that back. After the second one, after I published Angels and Archangels, I kind of felt finished then. Ritual, I did just for fun, just to kind of break things down even more and give people something super simple to work with, to do magic in daily life. But I felt like, for the most part, I had said most of what I wanted to say with Angels and Archangels. Everything that I know is not in there. Some of the things that we're talking about on here, or that we're getting ready to talk about, like, attaining knowledge and conversation of the HGA, crossing the abyss, all of those sorts of things. I felt like once you had gotten to the point where you were doing the rituals that are included in Angels and Archangels, if you're really doing this stuff, even though I didn't say everything in there, I didn't take people all the way through the process. If you're really doing those rituals, and if you're really hungry, you're going to be able to figure out the rest on your own. Even through things like the Athanasius-Kircher diagram, about the Shem operation, the diagram of Athanasius-Kircher invoking the 72 angels of the Shem operation. Even with that diagram alone was a huge part of what allowed me to figure out how to do some of this stuff. But I realized I don't want to write books on magic anymore. Part of it was I said everything I needed to say. But part of it was also, Ziggy says, I saw Angels and Archangels at Books A Million recently. I love Books A Million. What was I talking about? Oh, Angels and Archangels and the rituals and all of that. Part of it also was that I don't like selling people stuff, or I don't like trying to sell people stuff. I don't like trying to convince people that they should buy something. The way I always looked at it when I was writing those books is I didn't realize what the publishing world was like. Not fully. I understood the other stuff, like with Life After Death and Yours for Eternity and stuff like that. It's like you're trying to sell books, and yeah, you had to do all these interviews and stuff like that. But when it comes to matters of spirituality, I didn't think it was the same way. I didn't think it was all about selling people stuff, trying to convince people to buy. That's not why I wrote those books. I didn't write High Magic and Angels and Archangels or even Rituals thinking, I guess what it comes down to is I'm not a salesman. When I wrote those books, if you would have asked me what I am or what I do, I would have said a magician. That's kind of how I would have defined myself at that point in time. Not necessarily so much anymore. I don't really define myself as anything now, to be quite honest. It's why I, you know, have said repeatedly, I have zero desire to be called a teacher or any of that kind of stuff. I have no interest in putting any of these kind of labels on myself. My mind went blank. What was I talking about? Oh, but well, I guess the reason I'm talking about that, saying I would have defined myself as a magician, is because the thing I would not have defined myself as is a salesman. I did not write those books with the intention or even the thought in the back of my mind that, yeah, I've got to sell these things and make some money. That wasn't my thought process going into it. My thought process was, I have experienced some of the most amazing, incredible things that it's possible for human beings to experience in this world. And I want to get them down on paper so that other people can do the same thing, can get to experience what I've experienced, see what I've seen, go through what I've went through. That was all I was thinking when I was writing them. But even that world, it's almost like it's just a marketplace, just like everything else. The people who publish those books, the publishing companies want to make money, just like the people who publish comic books or magazines or whatever it is. It's the same thing. And I realized I don't like trying to sell people things. So one, I felt like I had said everything that I needed to say with those books. And no, Azael says you're not a teacher, you're a guide. Nope, not even that. Not even that. I am a guy on the internet that is talking about things that I learned and experienced and went through that most of the world would think is probably stark raving insane, but that y'all find interesting because you're doing the same kind of work. That's it. I don't want to guide anybody. I don't want to teach anybody any of that sort of stuff. But after those books, I realized, just like with the art world and doing those art shows, I realized I'm finished. Yes, Chris, that's it. Chris Vance said, you're reaching those who are supposed to reach with who you're supposed to reach with your work. That's what I always felt like. I always felt like, it's like with us on here, with y'all, I always figure the people that are supposed to talk to me and the people that I'm supposed to talk to will find their way to me. I'm not out there trying to grow an audience or, get new followers or any of that stuff that is like what we're told now we should be doing by the world. I feel like I don't need to do that. I feel like the people that are supposed to hear about this stuff. Yes, Bagner says organic living. Yes, the people that are supposed to hear about this, the people that are supposed to find me will find me in an organic way, whether I'm out there promoting myself or, trying to promote books or whatever it is. If somebody's supposed to find me, they'll find me. So just like with the art world, I realized I was finished writing about magic. And around that same time, I did my last retreat in Joshua Tree. And don't get me wrong, doing those retreats, it was an amazing experience. Not just the retreats, but even individual classes. Even before I started doing like 3 day long teaching marathons or 3 day long talking marathons or whatever you want to call it, I started off doing like little individual classes in tattoo shops for 2 hours. I would announce that I'm going to be at this art gallery or this tattoo shop on this date, and it's going to be open to 20 or 25 people, and it's going to be on this aspect of magic. And people started showing up. People started showing up for it, which was kind of mind blowing to me. People were showing up to listen to me talk about the very thing that the world had tried to murder me for talking about. And here it was. Suddenly, people weren't trying to murder me for it anymore, but they were actually paying to come in and listen to it. And they're sitting there taking notes while I'm talking. And that was an amazing experience. Something that I never in a million years thought was going to happen in this world, in this lifetime. And then that led to eventually the retreats, the full-blown 3 day long marathon sessions, most of which were in Joshua Tree. It's an amazing place out in the middle of the desert. People flew in from all over the world to take part in these things. And I had an incredible time doing them. But at the last one I did in Joshua Tree, I had this feeling of, again, it set in, this feeling of, you've done what you were supposed to do here. You've said what you were supposed to say. You've reached who you were supposed to reach. You've accomplished what you were supposed to accomplish. And it's time to move on. And I knew it was time to stop, to not do anymore. Not only that, but it was also like the people that I worked with there, and there were people that I really, really loved working with. They had also kind of reached a point in their own lives whenever they realized their time in Joshua Tree was finished, and they were moving on to other places and opening up centers in other states and stuff like that. So it was kind of the end of an era. And I thought I was finished even then. I didn't even tell anybody. I didn't come out and say, okay, folks, this is the last one I'm doing. But I kind of knew it was when I walked away. I just wasn't going to do anymore. And then this opportunity arose. And I'll tell you why I'm doing one of the reasons. This is the craziest thing. Derek was here this past week. We went out to dinner. We went to see that new Indiana Jones movie together. Just kind of catching up. But the thing about every single time we've ever met up in person in the years that we've known each other, every single time we've ever met up, something happens. Yes, Jessica says there is a season for everything. Exactly right. Exactly right. And seasons were not meant to last forever. A season is only part of a year. A season is only part of a time in our lives. Sometimes it's a long season, sometimes it's a short season. And you never know which it's going to be. But every time Derek and I have gotten together in the entire time we've known each other, it's always led to something explosive happening in both of our spiritual journeys, both of our lives. It's like we kind of bounce off each other, and it sets us off in new trajectories where we start learning and doing new things. And I feel like that same thing kind of happened this time, but the reason that I wanted to do this last retreat is because even all the way back when I lived in New York, probably I would say between 3 and 4 years ago, I started doing ritual work with the intention that we would be able to work together in some way, that Derek and I would be able to work together in some way, just to experience more of that energy and to let it kind of radiate out into the world around us. And I had kind of given up on it. I thought for whatever reason, that was a ritual that didn't work. It never seemed to manifest. I moved to New Orleans. He moved off to upstate New York. And he had another kid, ended up adopting a third kid. I just kind of went on with my life. And I thought for whatever reason, it just wasn't meant to happen. And then this opportunity presented itself. And I thought there's a possibility that something incredibly, incredibly potent could be born of this, not just for us, not just, us ricocheting off of each other and like experiencing the next stage of growth and development in our own lives, but if we got to do that in the center of other people, maybe it would radiate outwards and infect or affect, however you want to look at it, everyone there who is involved with it. Maybe it would do some of the same stuff to them that it's brought about in our lives. I thought this could be monumental in a bunch of people's lives if it happens the same way it's always happened for us. So I thought I'll do it one last time just for that energy, the ritual I did about us being able to work together so it's able to ground itself and manifest in the world. Finally, after these 4 years or so, it will finally manifest in the physical world. And it's not just energy floating around out there that I had set in motion in the past. And also, I think this is I will say now, this is going to be my last retreat. I don't plan on teaching publicly anymore. I think it's all going to be like private, like this, like the people who are meant to find me will find me, just like y'all found me. But I'm not going to be out there, trying to sell, and that's one of the things about that world. It's like whether it's books or whether it's, seats at a retreat or whatever it is, there's always this pressure on you. They want you to try to sell things to people. And I'm just not down with that. It makes me uncomfortable in a lot of ways. But I think this is the absolute perfect way to kind of seal this off and get closure on it and kind of, end once again another thing in my life that feels like I've done everything I wanted to do in that realm. I felt like I'd already said everything that I wanted to say or done everything that I'd wanted to do. But now it's like I finally got to do one with Derek, which was something that we had always wanted to do in the past. So it just feels, I know that once and for all, kind of finished with them now. I didn't mean to even be talking about all this tonight. We were just going to go straight into the talking about the HGA. But for some reason, I got side railed with this. And my point is, as much as I hate selling people stuff, if you can't come, if you can't be there in person, you can still get the live stream. And you can find the link anywhere. I'll post it again on here eventually, but you can also find it if you go to my Instagram account or on Twitter. All those things, you can find the link for it there if y'all want to join us on the live stream, even if you can't be there in person. That's my whole point. Just seeing what y'all are talking about. So on to the next thing. I guess that was, let me see. I have no idea, Nate. Nate saying, I was wondering, would it be rude to come to the town even if we aren't part of the retreat itself? I've never been to the town before. I really don't even know if it's a place you would want to go if you're not going to the retreat. I have no earthly idea. Thank you, Astral Blurs. Astral Blur says that podcast the other day was great. Should do more. Okay, so that was what made me want to talk about this tonight. If y'all saw the other day, I did Jason Liu's podcast, and that's another thing I'm finished doing, by the way. I have to do 3 more podcasts just because I gave my word to people in the Magick community that do these things, people that have shown me support, some of them, for several years. If y'all know Gabriella Herstick, she's written a few books. Most people call her Gabby. She's starting her own podcast, and we've, like just been in the same circle forever. Like one of my oldest friends and also my tarot teacher, it was a woman named Teresa Reed. I've known her for probably close to 30 years now, maybe 25 years. But she's also friends with her. She came to my very first book signing in LA, just all these things. And she's starting her own podcast, and I just kind of, want to show support for that, as well as, talk about, the only reason I'm doing it, honestly, is to talk about the retreat, like part of the reason I wanted to do this retreat was to, get Derek's name more into the world, kind of help introduce his voice to more people, or help introduce more people to his voice, that sort of thing. So that's why I even said I would do the podcast. He's doing them with me. So I'll do hers. Who are the other two? Oh, Trisha Carr. If y'all know Trisha Carr, she does a spirituality podcast. She's always been super supportive of everything I've done, always helped get the word out about books, all that sort of stuff. So we're both going to do hers, as well as, y'all know there's another girl on Instagram. She does a podcast. She goes by the name Pythian Priestess. She does a podcast about magic and witchcraft and all that sort of stuff. Anything even remotely associated with esotericism, all that sort of stuff. Those 3. I'm going to do those 3. And then I'm done. I'm calling it quits. I don't want to do interviews anymore. I don't want to do interviews. I don't want to do podcasts, and not even just about magic, or not even, things in that realm. I always think of that scene in the Mothman Prophecies where Richard Gere goes to see the guy who wrote about the Mothman. And whenever he goes and he meets him and he asks him, he says, "Did you write this book?" And the guy says, "I don't work in that field anymore." That's kind of, the way I see in the future, when if somebody asked me to do one of these podcasts or something, I would just say I don't work in that field anymore. And I don't mean just about magic. I also mean, I've had to do podcasts and interviews with newspapers and TV shows and documentaries and everything else about this case for 30 years now. For the 20 years I was in prison, as well as a big chunk of the 10 years I've been out, I've had to do interviews about this case to keep it, keep the pressure on the state of Arkansas and to try to get them to do the right thing and test the DNA and all that kind of stuff. And it's not fun. To be honest, there's something about it that's kind of re-traumatizing, having to go through that crap over and over and over again. I don't want to do it anymore. We've kind of reached a point in the case where they're either going to do what's right and test the evidence, or they're just so damn corrupt, which they are. But they're so corrupt that doing a million more interviews aren't going to make them do the right thing. It's going to be one or the other. I do think eventually, somehow, some way, the truth is going to come out. Somehow, some way, either we'll get the DNA testing done or something will happen. I do still have, it's like not even having faith in it, in the sense that people, some people, when they think they have faith in it, it's like they hope it's going to happen or whatever. For me, it's not even like hoping it's going to happen. It's like I just feel that sooner or later, somehow it's going to happen. This is an odd way of saying it to some people. A lot of people wouldn't understand this sort of thing, but the just the most blatant way I can say it, and I would say this to y'all, even though I wouldn't necessarily say it to everybody else in the world, because we live in a time when people are very hostile to stuff like this in certain ways. But I don't believe God is going to let me die with my name stained the way it has been by these people. I don't believe I'll go to my grave without this being resolved. Exactly, Deborah. Thank you so much. Deborah says that's not your job anymore either. Exactly. I've done everything I can do. I've said everything I can say. There's nothing else that I can put out there, nothing else I can push or any of that to make them do the right thing. It's now reached a point where either they have to do it or they're not going to do it, one way or the other. So I'm not going to be doing interviews even talking about the case anymore. I just, I never enjoyed it. But it's like, I just know, once again, it's like that time period is over. Just like with the art shows, just like with the books, just like with the retreats, whatever, all the different things that I've done in my life, for a short period of time. I even did the most god awful tattoos. All of my friends worked in a tattoo shop, and I spent pretty much every day there, to the point where it was like I may as well have worked there. And then I started doing tattoos, and then I reached a point where I knew this isn't for me. This is just a novelty thing I've been doing, and it's time to move on. All those things, I just knew. I've always known. Something tells me when I'm finished. And I feel like I'm finished with interviews. Yes, Bake Nurse says sometimes that's when the magic works, is when you really let it go, like a slingshot. Exactly. That is 100% absolutely correct. I found that to be true over and over and over my entire life. The day I walked, I was doing ritual work for like a year straight to get out of prison. And it was when I finally stopped thinking about getting out of prison that everything broke loose and I got out. Almost as soon as I stopped even thinking about it. By the time I walked out, I couldn't even remember what the outside world was like anymore, to be honest. And I wasn't even thinking about getting out. I was so focused on Magick and doing Magick that I didn't even, I would go for days, a week at a time without even thinking about, anything outside of prison. It was like I completely let go of ever getting out. Not that I gave up hope or I felt depressed or any of that stuff. It's like I just didn't think about it anymore. I just let it go. And that was when I got out. That's exactly right. Just reading what y'all are. Yep. Time Travel Kitty says, don't push that away, which you don't want. It'll swing back harder. Exactly. You don't, there's a saying, what you resist persists. You don't resist it. You don't fight against it. Fighting against something is the same kind of energy in a weird way as pursuing something, chasing after something. A lot of times, as long as you pursue things, chase after things, they will remain forever out of your grasp. Same way, as long as you resist things, a lot of times the thing you resist will forever stay in your life until you stop resisting, until you stop pursuing it. When you just don't think about it either way, when you just release it, exactly, Gannicus, just let it go. Mary says, surrender and win. Exactly. Exactly. So the thing I was wanting to talk about tonight, the HGA, to be honest, I think we're jumping the gun a little bit talking about this, just in the order of the lessons that we've been doing. That's exactly right, Azale. Azale says, probably because to resist it, you have to keep thinking about it. That's still putting your energy into it. That's exactly right. Exactly right. We've been going kind of in order with these lessons. And the order that I've been trying to go in is essentially the same way that I learned how to do this stuff and the same way that I did it. Like I said, I'm kind of leaving a record. This is almost like a journal for me or a diary in some way. And I'm trying to piece together for you exactly how I did this so that you can do the same thing, to experience some of the things you read about in books. So we've been talking about things. We've already went over all of what they call the neophyte rituals, the neophyte battery. I think it was Gannicus who called them that. When we're talking about the lesser banishing of the pentagram, the lesser invoking of the pentagram, lesser banishing and invoking of the hexagram, the rose cross, the middle pillar, all of those. Those are the rituals you're supposed to learn. Those are the first things you learn. The first things you start doing every day. And they're going to have tremendous, I did those every single day, just those, like learning how to do those, not just learning how to do those, but learning how to master those, getting them completely memorized down to the point where they were almost like muscle memory. I did those for at least a year, maybe 2 years. Just trying to, I would say just those, probably a year, because there's 2 more rituals. Technically, this is what I mean about we might be jumping the gun a little bit talking about this, is because there's really 2 more rituals that you need to master in order to attain the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. Now, there's variations on these 2 rituals, but the core that you need are the greater hexagram ritual, the planetary work, where there's a hexagram where you invoke each of the planetary energies, and you're kind of working your way up to the hexagram of soul, the solar hexagram, because whenever you do that one, you're doing all the other hexagrams simultaneously. All that the solar hexagram is, when you get the book out and you're looking at it, all it is all of the other planetary hexagrams drawn, overlapping one after another on top of each other. All of the other planetary hexagrams combined make the solar hexagram. So ultimately, what you're working your way to being able to do is the greater invoking hexagram of the sun, or the greater invoking hexagram of soul. You need to master that. The other thing that you need to master is the supreme pentagram ritual, the supreme invoking pentagram, where you're invoking the four fixed astrological energies of the zodiac. Yes, different faces of the sun. Exactly. Exactly. So now there's other aspects to this. When you do this, you're going to use angels and archangels. You're going to use the formula that I laid out in there that I called the celestial lotus, where you're invoking all of these different angels, but we're going to get to that. That'll be the next thing we talk about. I just wanted to touch a little bit tonight on the HGA ritual. And the reason it's kind of on my mind is part of it is the interview that I did with Jason Louv, or the podcast I did with Jason Louv. For those of y'all who were tuned in for it, one of the things we were talking about was, I can't remember if we were talking about it before or after we turned the camera on so that people could follow along. But one of the things we were talking about was the HGA. And Billy will get to that. Billy says, should we be working with each of the spheres individually for a certain amount of time before the greater of soul? Technically, yeah. Technically, but part of the reason for doing that is just so you get used to doing it. Because most people are going to have trouble just automatically jumping into doing the greater hexagram of soul. They may think they can do it, but most people can't do it. It takes time and practice and just becoming adept with it, becoming proficient at it to be able to do the hexagram of the sun, because it's pretty intense. It's time consuming. It requires a lot of focus. You're building your way up to it when you're working with all of these other planetary energies, these other planetary hexagrams. You're building, not only are you working on different parts of yourself, for example, when you're doing Venus invocations or Netzach invocations, you're working on your emotions. You're working on your emotion, the emotional part of yourself. When you're working with, Mercury or Hod, you're working on your intellectual aspect, your mind, all those sorts of things. So whenever you focus on doing one of these things, on invoking one of these things, you're working on a different aspect of yourself. But when you're doing the greater hexagram of soul, you are working on all of those aspects of yourself simultaneously, because you're doing all of those hexagrams overlapping each other as one. So I really think we probably should talk about that some more. We should probably go into a little more detail and depth just about the technicalities of doing the greater hexagram ritual, the greater hexagram of soul. Just to go over things like, the minutia of how you do it. That would probably be helpful. And we should probably also go a little more in depth. I think we could do in one episode, in one live stream, we could probably cover the greater hexagram and the supreme pentagram ritual. I think there's plenty of time, because there's not a lot to say about them, that y'all haven't already heard. The most that we need to talk about, or the thing we probably need to talk about the most, is just the technical aspects of how to do them. And then also adding the angels in, the same way that I described in angels and archangels, like where you're doing the celestial lotus. So we'll do another episode where we'll kind of take a step back, or another live stream where we'll take a step back and cover those two rituals, like the technical aspects of how to do them. But one of the things that was on my mind, and the reason I wanted to talk about this just a little bit tonight, the HGA, one of the things, it was like a lot of stuff just started coming to me whenever I was doing that thing with Jason Louv, whenever we were, just sitting there talking about stuff. And I was telling him how when I got out of prison in 2011, this is going to sound crazy to people who grew up with the internet, people who've seen the internet all this time. I had never seen it. When I got out of prison in 2011, I had never seen the internet, never used a cell phone, didn't know anything about any of this stuff. The reason I'm bringing that up is because it kind of shows you why I'm going to say what I'm about to say. I, honest to God, thought that I was probably one of a very, very few people left on earth who was actually doing magic. I thought this was something nobody cared about. I thought it was something nobody believed in. I thought it was something nobody was doing anymore. I thought it was something that most of the world would consider, like, if you talk about magic, they're going to automatically assume, number one, either you're a flake, a weirdo, and you're delusional, or number two, you're a devil worshiper, which is what, when I was a kid, they always attached it to. But nobody actually, I believe nobody knew what this stuff was. Nobody was doing this stuff. Nobody cared about this stuff. With maybe a very, very small handful, I thought you could probably count the number of people that were really doing this stuff in the entire world on maybe one hand. And then when I got out of prison, got introduced to the internet, gradually, slowly over time, when I started learning how to use the internet and all that kind of stuff, I gradually, slowly started to realize that there's like an entire world of people out there talking about this stuff. And at first that was kind of exciting. You're thinking, wow, there's a whole world of people out there talking about this, a whole community you can get in touch with. And you're finally maybe going to make some friends that, you can have conversations with about what you've experienced and all this stuff. It seems like a whole world opened up. But then the more that world opened up and the more of those people in that world I started to come in contact with, the more I once again started to feel like I was the only person actually doing this stuff. There's a whole world out there where it's trendy and it's like, especially in the past few years, like, especially in the past, probably 3 years, maybe 4 years max, there was some kind of explosion of popularity in the world. And suddenly you had people all over the internet talking about this stuff. It went kind of mainstream. It's starting to die off a little bit now. And honestly, I hope it continues to do so. I hope it continues to kind of fade away, because there's so many people out there that they don't really even understand it. They don't know what it is. They're basically just reading stuff off of Wikipedia or whatever it is, and using it to create content, as they say now. Yeah, Ganica says fads come and go. That's kind of what yeah, Jessica Yu says it's a whole aesthetic and only that for a lot of people. Michael says, kind of like in the late 90s, everyone was a pagan. See, I miss the late 90s. I wasn't here for that. I was still in prison. I didn't see any of that. But yeah, it's kind of that same vibe, and a lot of it is aesthetic. So what I realized about most of these people is They might be collecting books about the stuff. They might even be writing books about the stuff. They may be liking witchy pictures on Instagram, or, well, I'll just say from my own personal firsthand experience, I have come in contact with very, very few people who really are doing this stuff. It's kind of back to realizing that again, or feeling that again. It's like, you think they're, when you come in contact with all the people on the internet and using it for aesthetic purposes and all that kind of stuff, you think there are people really doing this who understand what it means. But honestly, there's not. There's really not. Even the ones that are doing it a little bit are what they used to call, like in the 90s, dabblers. People who learn to do a trick or two, like charge a sigil, or um yeah, Billy says, I'm more interested in people doing magic who look like cowboys rather than people dressing up as witches with fancy books. Same, brother. Same. That what you're describing, those are people who are not trying to use this stuff to build an identity for themselves. They're doing it, but they're not building an identity for themselves out of it. That's what you're describing, and those are the same kind of people that I'm interested in. But my point is, you even have a ton of people now talking about, it's become all the rage, all the trend, people talking about the holy guardian angel, attaining knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. And to be honest, most of them don't know what it even means. I'm not saying this to just shit talk people, because I don't. I try my best, to the best of my ability, not to do that. I think it's a very, very bad habit and personality trait to cultivate, talking trash about people. I'm just telling you the God's honest truth. In the entire world of magic, I've only ever come in contact with one other person that I knew had attained the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, much less, the other stuff like crossing the abyss. And this one other person was someone that's kind of famous in the world of magic. They've written a lot of books and stuff, but you're not going to see them on the internet. They here's the thing. Here's my point. Well, first, let me read you something. Let me read you something really quickly. This is what I mean about most of these people who honestly don't even know what the HGA is. It's like you're going to hear two things. One is a lot of talk about the higher self, which, yeah, it is, and yeah, it's not. Also, higher self is one of those things that means different things to different people. It's one of those things people use the phrase a lot, like shadow work. It's one of those things, one of those phrases that became popular, but everybody's using it to mean something different, some of which is not even remotely close to what the original meaning of that was. Like when you're doing shadow work, it doesn't mean anything dark or spooky or any of that kind of stuff. It just meant that you were finally realizing what an asshole you are, and you're starting to work towards remedying how much of an asshole you are. That's what shadow work means. Not anything dark or spooky or, you know, any of that sort of stuff. I'm going to read you a quote. The other thing that people say after higher self, the other thing you'll hear them talking about is they still talk about it like it's an actual guardian angel. You know, they look at it in the religious sense of the word, like every single person that's ever born has an angel assigned to watch over them from the moment they're born until the moment they die. Even if you've ever seen that movie, what was it called? I showed it here. What's it called? The one about the HGA. Y'all know what I'm talking about the woman that wants to like meet the HGA. And that's the thing too. It's not a dark song. Thank you, Gannicus. Yes, Jessica Hughes, a dark song. So even in a dark song, that's the way they approach it, and that's the way they show it on there. It's a good movie. I liked it. There were parts of it that were realistic. By and large, it's not. But you don't usually get to see movies even about magic. So it was kind of, great to see it, for that reason. But that is not what this stuff is about. It's not your HGA. It's the HGA. And one of the things, so two things. One, if I forget, remind me in just a second about what Jason Liu said about this that kind of triggered me wanting to talk about this. But I'm going to read you something first by Crowley. This is from Aleister Crowley in Magick in Theory and Practice, where he's talking about the HCA. He tells you exactly what attaining the knowledge and conversation of the HCA, not only attaining the knowledge and conversation of it, that's like the middle of the process. The end result of the process is the marriage of the HCA, which is kind of what he's describing. He's describing the entire process, like at the end when you experience the marriage of the HCA. This is what he says in Magick in Theory and Practice. There is a single main definition of the object of all magical ritual. It is the uniting of the microcosm with the macrocosm. The supreme and complete ritual is therefore the invocation of the holy guardian angel. Not your holy guardian angel, the holy guardian angel. Or, in the language of mysticism, union with God. He tells you right there what it means in magic whenever you hear the phrase attaining the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. What we are talking about is union with God, not talking to some sort of angel that is supposed to guide you and protect you through life or any of that sort of stuff, the thing that most people think it is now, like in the new agey world. Maybe people do have those things, maybe, who knows, but that's not what we're talking about in magic. That's not what Crowley was talking about. It's not what the Golden Dawn was talking about. It's not what we're talking about in astrotheurgy or anything else. What we are talking about when we are talking about the holy guardian angel, well, Gannicus, not exactly union with the divine, union with the God of the Old Testament. Union with what the Gnostics called the demiurge. This is why Crowley said at one point, he also said he witnessed God and Satan fighting over his soul, and God prevailed, but now he no longer knows which one was God and which one was Satan. The God of the Old Testament, to certain Gnostic sects, was also, who does the Bible say is the God of this world? The God of this world is the devil, according to the Bible. When I was experiencing some of this stuff, and I don't want to get all cosmic woo woo or any of that because I hate it, it's just irrelevant, neither here nor there. But one of the things that I saw whenever you get to a certain point in this process is I saw the face of God. I was standing before God. But whenever I would try to look and focus and notice any details of God's face, like when you're saying, okay, I'm looking at God, but what does God look like? And I try to really zoom in and focus on any details, it would turn into the devil. But then when I would say, okay, well, what does the devil really look like then? And I'm trying like, what's his eyes look like? What's his face looks like? Or however you want to say it, what's it really look like? If I would try to look too closely, I would realize I was just looking back at God. They're the same thing. The God of the Old Testament and the devil that Christians believe in, they're the same thing. The demiurge. Yeah, the demiurge. So what it is union with the demiurge or the God of the Old Testament. But the actual source of that is not the source of creation. That intelligence did not create the universe. The universe was created by the same source that created the demiurge. The thing, and somebody just told me, they said, you said to remind you about Jason Louv. Jason Louv brought up something that was in the Golden Dawn papers, and that I'd never heard this phrase before. And I think that may have been the very reason that I was, led to do this last talk with him, this last podcast with him, is because sometimes we're led to information that we need, other pieces of the puzzle. He said in the Golden Dawn papers, they call the demiurge, they call the God of the Old Testament, whatever you want to call it, the guardian angel of the universe. That's what it means, Jessica. Jessica says, I thought Yaldabaoth was a false god. That's what they mean by a false god. A false god means it's not the creator of the universe. The God of the Old Testament did not create the universe. It created the world in its own image. It created mankind in its image, but it did not create, the building blocks of the universe. It came from the same source that the universe did. So, and Alsic says, if it didn't create the universe, what use is it to us? Because it's also a part of you. It's both within you and without you, and you have to go beyond it in order to reach the higher places. In order to go beyond it, you have to merge with it. You have to marry it. But that's so far off in the distance that me saying that, it'll make you think you know what I mean. Yeah, it's the next rung on the ladder, exactly, we the people. It's part of the process. You have to go through that part of the process if you're going to reach the next part of the process, which is crossing the abyss, the dissolution of self, all of that. But that's what they mean when they say attaining the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, not your holy guardian angel, the holy guardian angel. They're talking about the guardian angel of the universe. That's what it is. There's a group of people in the Middle East, and I can't remember what they call them. It's something like Zedis or Yazidis or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But the Muslims have been killing these people for a long time because the Muslims say that they're Satanists. They practice a kind of religion that yes, exactly, Gannicus. Yes, Yazidis. They worship the peacock. Yes. They call it the peacock angel. And the peacock angel's name is it Talis Malik or Malis Telik, something like that. But they say this peacock angel was above all the other angels. The peacock angel that they're talking about is the God of the Old Testament. It is the guardian angel of the universe. Somebody asked just a second ago, like what use is it to us? You have to understand it. Not from reading about it in books, or not from no, the demiurge is not the flesh. You have to understand these things from an experiential perspective. Not read about it in books or hear other people talking about it, or the thing what I'm another one of the things that Jason Lou said when we were doing this interview. He said, when I told him what I just said to y'all a few minutes ago about how at one point I thought I was the only person still doing this stuff, he said, I honestly don't think you're far off the mark. He said, I don't think most people are doing this stuff. They may be collecting the books. They may be arguing about the minutia, arguing about this corresponds to this, or that corresponds to whatever, or this person says this and this. They love to argue about that kind of stuff, bicker about it, and, whatever, which if that's your thing, if that's fun to you, then by all means go for it. But that's not going to get you an experiential, if that's even a word, under the experience of going through this stuff. That's not going to get you there. The thing I wanted to mostly say tonight, kind of the point that I wanted to get to, is Billy, that's exact. Billy nailed it dead on the head. Billy says the topic is popular, not the actual practice. Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is not to trash talk people, but to point out there are no shortcuts. There is no easy way to do this. It's going to come down to how bad do you want it? Do you want it bad enough to actually put in the grueling amount of energy that it's going to take to get you there? Or do you just want to talk about it and argue about the minutia? One thing, people don't really even understand the implications of the Abramelin ritual, the book of Abramelin the Mage. They think it's just a book about attaining the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. When in actuality, it's an entire system of magic unto itself. And it culminates in attaining the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. But one of the things you notice about it is you are gradually ramping up your obsession, your dedication and commitment to the practices. And I'm going to shut up in just a minute, I promise. when you first start off doing the Abramelin work in the beginning, you can still interact with the world. You're supposed to uh, deal with people fairly. You're supposed to do your best to not lie, not cheat people out of anything, not try to screw people out of money, not act through greed, all of that sort of stuff. You can still interact with the world, but you have to examine your thoughts and your behavior towards the world with a fine tooth comb. But as you progress, you reach a point in the process where you're not even interacting with the world anymore. You have to break away from the world, seal yourself off at least for a time, and do this stuff for hours a day. Like when you're looking at the Abramelin book, so this process can last for 18 months. It's a year and a half. And to be honest, you can do this very quickly. You can experience all of this very quickly. It should take you between a year and 2 years to get all the preliminary rituals down. All of the stuff we've been talking about, the lesser pentagrams, lesser hexagrams, greater hexagrams, supreme pentagram. It should take you between a year and 2 years to get all of that stuff down to muscle memory. You should be doing that stuff hundreds of times in those 2 years. If you do that, technically, you could probably experience everything we're talking about right now, the HGA, in another 2 years. So honestly, you're talking about 4 years of work to get to that point. And this is a big if you're willing and if you're able. Some people aren't able. Here's, people who are more outwardly focused, people who want to be more part of the world, people who want to go to concerts and parties and, do whatever the hell it is, clubs, I don't know, bar, whatever it is that people do with their time. You got to want this worse than you want any of that stuff. It's about, you remember in A Dark Song, whenever he draws the circle around the house and he says, I'm cutting this house off from reality. Y'all remember that? I can't remember exactly how he says he's detaching it from the world, or he's detaching it from reality. And he's doing it symbolically by drawing the circle of salt around the entire house on the outside. Yeah, last chance, Gannicus. Exactly. That's what he says. He says, this is your last chance. Whenever I finish the circle, we're cut off from the world. There comes a point in this process where if you want to experience these things, you are going to have to cut yourself off from the world. And not just the world of the outside world, the things I'm talking about, but even things like expending, energy on the internet. You're going to have to get to a point where you are obsessed. You are going to have to get to a point where you think of nothing but reaching God, where you think about it from the time you get up to the time you go to bed. Single-pointedly focused and concentrated. Yes, Jessica says utterly devoted. But more than devoted. You've got to lock onto it like a pit bull. Like nothing else in this world matters to you as much as this does. It's like Jesus said. He said something about anybody who chooses their family over me won't find me, won't be able to, that you have to choose him above all things, over everything, even your family, even your friends, everything. That's the point you have to reach with the HGA and your determination to reach it. And it's not like just a cold plodding, I'm determined to reach this. You will be excited. When you start to experience, like steps leading up to it, and you start to, see things and experience things, you're going to get so excited about it. You're going to be so amazed by what you're experiencing that it's not like you have to make yourself be obsessed. It's not like you have to force yourself to be obsessed. You will automatically be obsessed whenever you start to have all the experiences leading up to it. You're going to be so amazed and so in awe and so focused on God that you don't have to shut out the world. You're not going to care about the world. You're not going to none of this stuff out here is going to be a distraction to you, not because you're trying to force you, like, man, I really want to go to that concert this weekend, but I can't because I got to stay home and do magic. That's not what I mean. I mean, you're not going to care about that. Like if somebody did come to you and say, let's go to this concert this weekend, you would be like, how the hell am I going to get out of this? I don't want to go. I don't have time for this. I don't have the energy to spare for this. I don't have the bandwidth to spare for this. The obsession is going to come naturally and organically. But the reason, like I said, I've only ever came across one person. I'm not saying there's not more in the world, there might be. But I'm telling you, as far as people that I myself have come into firsthand experience with, I found one other person. And this person is someone, once again, they don't have another job other than magic. It's like they write books about magic and they teach about magic and all that sort of stuff. So it's like they have been fortunate, kind of in the same way that I was. Like when I was in prison, I didn't have to go to a job. I didn't have kids to raise. I didn't have a million different things tearing at my attention. When I was in prison, most people think that that's a horrible thing. And in some ways it is, but in a lot of ways it was also a blessing because it was what allowed me to, yes, Gannicus, you're right. That's it. That's who, that's yes, absolutely. That's it. That's him. In some ways people look at it as I was cursed or I went through this horrific, hellish time. And in some ways I did, but it was also a blessing because it provided me with the absolute perfect situation to do this work. Almost no one in this world will be handed the perfect situation that I was given when I was put into solitary confinement. Not only just sent to prison, but I was put in solitary confinement for 10 years. Most people will never be given a gift like that. I didn't have to struggle to stay off the internet. I had never seen the internet. And I say struggle because honestly, most people are addicted to it now. To some degree, either greater or lesser degree, people are addicted to the internet now. I had never seen it before, so I couldn't get addicted to it. I couldn't, focus on anything else. There was nothing else in my world or in my life for me to focus on other than this. I was blessed with being put in solitary confinement for 10 years. Don't be ashamed of it, DeJimin. Don't. It says I am deeply addicted to the internet. Oh, not ashamed to say it. Oh, there you go. I thought you said for a second you were ashamed to say it. Yeah, that's the thing. Most people in this day and age are. Just like most people say, like in the 80s, were addicted to the television. There's always something. There's always something, but it's something you shouldn't feel ashamed about. I don't think anybody should feel ashamed about it. It's good. Yeah, Jessica says it's designed to be addictive. Exactly. Exactly. Rumi says, why'd you get put in solitary, if you don't mind my asking? It was basically the state got a bunch of money that they were supposed to be using for, it's a long, boring story. The government hands out money to people all the time for various programs. They come up with these ideas about like agendas or whatever it is that they want to push, and they hand out money to people who are willing to help with these agendas. Well, at one point in time, especially like after 9/11, there was all this thing about, everybody's get tough on crime, get tough on crime, get tough on crime. So they decided they were going to build, like even in Arkansas, they gave the state millions of dollars to build a super maximum security unit prison. There's only something like 5 of them in the United States. I can't remember exactly how many, but there's not many at all. Not many at all. They built a super maximum security prison, and then they had to have somebody to put in it. They had to put somebody in it to fill it up, to show that they were doing something with it. So they took everybody on death row, even though they have always said, this is one of those things you can look up, in prison, you have less trouble out of anyone on death row than you do out of the rest of the prison. You know, if you're dealing with drunks or thieves or something like that, you're dealing with a lot of times troublemakers in prison. But something about the people that are on death row, you know, it's a whole nother thing. I'm not going to get into it right now because it's very weird, and it's energy related and all kinds of other stuff. They usually cause the less trouble out of anyone in prison. You are going to have the least amount of trouble out of people on death row than you will out of any other part of the prison system. But it's the ones that when you say the name, it puts fear into people. Oh, the guy's on death row. Death row, those are the worst of the worst, when they're not. You know, a lot of times people out in the regular population doing a 10-year sentence have done far worse things than some of the people on death row have. But they put us in there because they had to show they were doing something with it, basically. But when we come back, and I'm not going to talk about this at the higher pledge levels. We're going to be talking about other stuff. I want to save this information and talking about this stuff for people who are at the lower pledge levels, you know, like the $5, $10 a month levels, just so that everybody gets access to it, as many people as possible get access to it. When I'm talking about the high magic lessons, you know, the next one will be lesson 10, and we're going to cover the greater hexagram ritual and the supreme pentagram ritual, the last 2 parts of this puzzle. And then we should do another one also on the angels, the angel invocations, and the celestial lotus, and what I call the expanded celestial lotus, or what I used to call that. What I used to call that until I realized that Athanasius Kircher had already given it another name. He called it the Shem operation. Yep, tough on crime really means more profit prisons. Exactly. It does indeed. It does indeed. Yeah, the Rose Cross. I mean, the Gannicus says Rose Cross would be good for some. It is, but honestly, there's not a lot to say about it. You know, it's like it's like you can say pretty much everything there is to say about the Rose Cross in like 2 minutes or less. And it's almost impossible to tell somebody how to do it. You know, it's one of those rituals you're going to have to teach yourself how to do. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is by having that book in one hand while you go around the room and drawing it around the walls. You know, there's no real way that I can describe it any better than that. It is something you need to learn. It's not necessary, not 100% necessary to go through this process, to add to this process, but it is another tool that it is really valuable to have in your toolbox. But it's not necessarily part of astrotheurgy and the steps it requires as we're moving through this stuff. Yeah, I use the Archangel's audiobook for the Rose Cross. Walk through it as you listen. That is a very good. Yeah, that's the thing. Beckner says, I don't feel I get a lot from the Rose Cross. That can be for 2 reasons. One is you might not be doing it exactly right. I felt the same way until something clicked into place and I finally got it right. And I was finally able to do it right. I felt like I'm not getting anything out of this. This isn't doing anything. You know, like when I'm doing the pentagram rituals or the hexagram rituals, I feel something. I see something. When I'm doing the Rose Cross, I'm I'm not getting anything out of this. And then when something clicked into place and I realized, oh, okay, now I get it. So that can be part of the reason. One part of the reason could be that there's something about it that you haven't gotten quite right yet. You haven't completely mastered it or don't understand exactly how to do it. But the other reason could be because it is a very subtle ritual. It's not loud like the pentagram and hexagram rituals are. When you do the pentagram and hexagram rituals, it's like lighting up like a spotlight on the astral level of reality. It is loud. The Rose Cross is a very subtle, gentle ritual. It's doing something. And once you get perceptive enough, you can nuance exactly, Gannicus. Once you get perceptive enough, you've done it, you've mastered it, and you get perceptive enough to feel it. You can tell it's doing something, but it takes a little longer to get there than it does with the pentagram and hexagram rituals because it's, like Gannicus just said, nuanced, it's subtle, and it's very gentle. It is not a loud, ritual in the same sense of the pentagram and hexagram rituals. So Inelisic says, could I have your permission to use clips of your voice in some musical compositions? Me and my friend make electronic based meditation and dance music using clips of enlightening people. Go for it. Absolutely. I don't care. Time Travel Kitty says the cube or the sphere. The Rose Cross is a cube. Well, Rumi says at what point should you move from the middle pillar to the full tree of life? And I'll shut up after this. This is the last question because we're already going over an hour and a half, but I'll cover this real quick. At what point do you go from doing the middle pillar to the full tree of life? When you're doing the middle pillar, you're doing 5 energy centers that run along the center point of the body. When you're doing the whole tree of life, you're using all 10 energy centers, one at the top of your head, one at each side of your head, one at each shoulder, one in the middle of your chest, one at each hip, one at your pelvis, and one at your feet. When you first start doing that, you're supposed to do it every day for at least, I would say at least 6 months. Do it every day for at least 6 months. But eventually you reach a point, like in the Golden Dawn, what they would do is after you had like integrated it into your being, like done it every day for at least 6 months, after that, you only would do it 4 times a year. You would do it at both of the equinoxes and both of the solstices. Other than that, you would just do the middle pillar. After you had gotten used to doing all 10 spheres and integrated them into your system, all of that sort of stuff, you need to do them for at least 6 months daily. But after you do them for 6 months daily, then you could drop down to just doing them 4 times a year, the solstice and the equinoxes. And part of the effect of that is you're putting yourself in a kind of harmony and balance with all the energy going on around you. Yes, Billy says, could having 1 day off from rituals per week be beneficial? Like how you need rest days for weightlifting if you want to grow. Yes, absolutely. If you want to take 1 day a week, I wouldn't suggest taking more than 1 day a week off. Even in the Bible, it says God took, the 7th day off, rested on the 7th day. So if God needs rest on 1 day, chances are you probably need rest on 1 day. But yeah, and maybe do it on the same day every week. Maybe even do it on Saturday. Saturday is the 7th day, not Sunday. Saturday. Saturday is the Sabbath day. Sabbath, Saturn, all that. But yeah, maybe Saturday doesn't work for you. But whatever it is, yeah, taking 1 day off a week is beneficial because it allows you time to rest and recover. Okay, I'm going to shut up because we have gone over an hour and a half, and I don't want to keep y'all on here all night. But we will, whenever we come back and we do the lower pledge levels again, we'll pick up where we left off, and we'll talk about the greater hexagram, supreme pentagram, and we'll start delving into the angel work that you're going to need in order to do this work. The celestial lotus, the deacons, all that kind of stuff. That's what we're going to pick up talking about. um, exactly the same way that I did it. Okay, guys, I'm going to shut up as usual. I just want to say thank y'all. Thank you, Douglas. Thank you, Firebird Mage. Thank all of you guys, Tanya, Max. Thank you guys. All right. I just want to say I truly appreciate y'all's support, your love, everything else through the years. Being here with me, listening to this, contributing to the conversation. I truly appreciate it more than I could ever articulate. And I will talk to you guys soon. Love y'all. I can figure out how to turn it off.